It's fun watching the religious talk about one imaginary friend while trying really hard not to talk about their own, especially when, I think, they realize just how similar they both are. And that's what we're going to get at today as Mike Winger talks about Santa Claus on his own channel, where he talks about the Christian analog of Santa Claus every single day. So this ought to be fun, right? Now, as you all know, I don't care for Mike Winger. I'm not a fan of any apologist, but I think Mike is one of the worst, at least in my opinion. But this serves two purposes. First, to see what Mike is up to and laugh at it, which I'm sure we're going to do, but also because I run into a lot of atheists who don't much like the idea of kids believing in Santa Claus, so we can touch on that too. Granted, this would have been better done had I done it before Christmas, but Mike didn't put it out soon enough for me to get to that. And with my 2 to 3 month lead time, it really doesn't matter anyhow. So just pretend it's snowing outside and we'll get started.
I actually asked on Twitter, I think it was on Twitter a long time ago. I just asked whoever followed me there. Those of you who were taught that there was a Santa Claus, that he was real and all that, when you found out there wasn't, how did that affect you? I was just curious. And I'd seen a variety of responses. Some people said, what do you tell your kids about Santa? Oh, a strangely volatile question.
It is for a lot of people, and yes, I get it. There are a lot of atheists who look at Santa and think it's just a little bit too close to God for comfort. Well, I don't want to lie to my kid. And I guess that is a valid concern, but one, I think, that can be turned to your advantage, as I'm sure we'll get into further into the video. So I'm going to let Mike get some thoughts out before I really dig in. Go right ahead, Mr. Winger. Let's see what the hell you've got.
Is there a chance that kids who find out Santa isn't real might think the same about Jesus?
And that's kind of what I was hoping he'd say, and yes, this can be a perfect object lesson for kids who start out believing in Santa, and then when they inevitably find out Santa isn't real, they're likely to be more skeptical of other claims that they run into in their lives. Because Santa, if we're going to be honest, is really a pretty harmless thing, and whether you tell your kids about Santa or not, they are going to run into that concept on their own, just like they do with gods. The subject is going to come up and you are going to have to deal with it, just like the issue of God, at least if you live in a religious society. Now, there are ways that you can handle it. You can say it's silly and you shouldn't believe it, or you could use it as a learning opportunity to teach your kids how to think critically, and that's what I did. So let's get back to Mike, because I could just ramble on all day on this, and I think you'd get bored.
Will you spoil Santa for children that aren't yours? All right, let me separate the Santa issue into a few topics. One, it'll ruin your faith. Or will it ruin your faith, right? That topic, that's a separate question.
I'll just respond to these one at a time. Honestly, if your faith is so weak that it can be undone by Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, then you've already got some problems. But really, where it's going to get kids thinking is when they realize that this one undemonstrated, completely indefensible thing that turns out not to be true, well, what about other undemonstrated, completely indefensible things that they only hold on faith? And I think this is why some theists get really bothered by this, because they recognize, at least on some level, probably subconsciously, that Santa and God are really the same thing. They're not real. They're believed because they provide emotional comfort, and that's a scary concept to the religious, isn't it? Well, if you recognize that, then you ought to be asking yourself some serious questions about your faith. But they won't, because, as we know, they don't really care. They just want to believe it because fee-fees. So this could be really scary for the religious. And I'm curious to see how Mike is going to respond, but let's let him get on to his next point.
Then there's a separate issue that I'm more on board with, which is that is not true.
And neither is your God. But you're not willing to go that far, are you? See, this is where we see Mike immediately start to backpedal because I think he understands on some level that there's an uncomfortable similarity between Santa Claus and God. So he has to throw in, oh, but our belief is true, just to reassure his viewers that he's not straying too far off the reservation. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple more of those comforting insistencies along the way, because anybody with a couple of working brain cells, they've got to be thinking that right now, right?
This is moving towards the realm of bold-faced deception for the sake of your own entertainment, but it's deception. It's not play, which is different. Kids know play. Play's fun, play's good. Play, I'm going to be a monster attacking you, but you're not actually convincing your kid you're really a monster attacking them, right? That's play. This is just bold-faced deception, in my opinion.
See, we never expressly told our kids about Santa Claus. We didn't lie to them. We didn't try to convince them that it was true. They picked that up from friends and family members, and as I said, it was completely innocent. But we just went along with it once they already had the concept in their heads. They got a couple of presents from Santa every Christmas. They got more from us, and the best ones, of course, were always from us. Santa never gave them clothes or anything like that, since they don't get anything useful for Christmas or birthdays. It's all just frivolous fun stuff, and all the stuff that they actually need, they get it when they need it. If they said, well, I need this, we never told them to wait for their birthday or whatever. If they needed it, they just got it. The holidays are for fun. Anyway, back to Mike.
And then maybe a third category we could say, which is a category of replacement. Okay, let me come back to that one. How is Santa replacement, that issue?
I have no idea what he actually means by that, but let me throw in my 2 cents anyhow, and what I think he might mean. Now, I don't think Santa Claus is a replacement for friends or family or anything like that. It's in addition, not instead of. They never got less presents. In fact, they probably got more. When they went back to school, they could tell their friends, well, I got this from Santa, plus all the stuff that they got from us. It was better not to have them feel like they were missing out, because their friends were certainly celebrating what they were getting from Santa. So anyhow, that's an aside. I guess we'll figure out what Mike means down the road someplace. I hope.
So first off, does Santa cause people to lose their faith? Sometimes it does cause the unbreaking of a dam, where and I know there's testimonies. I actually asked on Twitter. I think it was on Twitter a long time ago. I just asked whoever followed me there. Those of you who were taught that there was a Santa Claus, that he was real and all that, when you found out there wasn't, how did that affect you?
Yes, that was a piece from the beginning of the video, but at the time it made sense to leave it in for context, so I did. Now, I and my kids and my wife, we all fall into the I didn't care camp. Now, like I said, I have never told my kids that Santa was real. I didn't tell them he wasn't real, but I didn't indoctrinate them into the faith. They picked that up on their own, and I just ran with it for a lot of reasons that I've already gone into. When they realized that there was something going on, and they both did it completely on their own without my help, I didn't lie about it. When they asked me if Santa was real, I said no. I think the only reason they asked was because they were afraid that they would get less presents without Santa, but they didn't. They got the exact same number of presents, just with our names instead of Santa's. They didn't care why we'd done it. There was no trust lost. They were just concerned if they were going to keep getting stuff, and they did. So let's jump back to the video.
I was just curious. And I'd seen a variety of responses. Some people said this was like, totally made me question everything about God, because somehow the concept of Santa and their belief in that felt similar when they stopped believing that to their belief in God.
Because it's the same thing. It should feel similar, and that's what makes it a teachable moment. Because when my kids were questioning Santa, they should have realized that anything else they might have believed without justification, that was all pretty much the same thing. If they're asking questions about Santa, then they ought to be asking questions about other things. Now, they never had a God belief. I think it just made a light go off in their heads. Oh, that God thing that the other kids at school are talking about. Oh, yeah. It made them more skeptical. Now, granted, we'd been teaching them skepticism and critical thinking skills from the very beginning, but I think that they realized after the whole Santa thing went away how it actually worked in practice. Here's this thing that they once believed that maybe they realized they shouldn't have believed it. Not that it would have hurt them in any way, but maybe they shouldn't have. And now, maybe that's true of other things as well. If they had come to me at age 5 and said, Santa isn't real, I'd have agreed with them, and they'd have gotten presents anyway without having to leave out milk and cookies, because I had to eat all that. If they had learned it at 15, which would have been way too late, then that's what happened. They would have learned the lesson when they learned it. Actually, I probably would have said something before that, but I do think it's important that kids learn that God, like Santa, is just a fairy tale. God is just a fairy tale for adults, just like Santa is a fairy tale for kids. Believing never hurt them any, and it probably did them a lot of good as burgeoning critical thinkers.
Now, it's not for me, okay? And it shouldn't be, because your reasons for believing in Santa versus your reasons for believing in God are radically different. And anybody who goes, if you still believe in God, you may as well believe in Santa. Like, this is a very shallow faith. It's a faith that's not, it's responsive merely to I believe in God because, people around me say so.
You notice how nervous he acted saying that, right? This is what tells me that Mike doesn't actually believe any of this, or that he's got some serious questions and is really only in it for the same reason the pastors who hopefully wind up in the clergy project are doing it. The money. If you only believe in God for the same reason you believe in Santa, well, they are pretty much the same thing. Appeals to faith don't change that. Because just like as an adult you shouldn't believe in Santa, you shouldn't, as an adult, believe in God. Yes, kids can be kids because A, they don't know any better, and B, it's just a bit of harmless fun that doesn't hurt them anyway anyhow. Adults should know better, and they have adult responsibilities that are demonstrably harmed by a strong belief in a God. All you have to do is watch fundamentalists and evangelicals say, well, I'm going to beat my kids and beat my wife because God says I can. Crap like that. Yes, that is extreme, but it demonstrably does happen. And if you take away that belief in a God, then those actions become much more difficult to justify. How many kids are dead because their parents refused to get them basic medical care, believing that God would provide? Then take God out of the picture. How many kids are dead because their parents didn't get them basic medical treatment for no real reason, because they don't have imaginary friends? This is where the problem comes in as far as I'm concerned. Even if you aren't that extreme, even if you do nothing wrong, your silly beliefs still influence how you behave. And this is not doing you any favors.
Instead of I look around and I perceive that God's been revealed through creation, I look at fulfilled prophecy, or I consider the resurrection of Jesus, or I see the work of God in my own life. Santa ain't got nothing like that on me.
But the problem is, none of that is demonstrable. And I run into this all the time, and it's helpful to understand what's really going on so you can more easily dismantle it. Yes, you might perceive God is X, or interpret God as X, or believe God is X. But that doesn't mean that God is X. Once you go outside of your own head and start talking to other people, you find out very quickly that just because you believe a thing about God, no matter how strongly you personally believe it or how much sense it might make to you, other people are not going to take your word for it. Other people who aren't part of your faith. They might have other ideas about God, which of course leads to 45,000 or whatever sects of Christianity, or they might have those ideas about other gods, which leads to other religions, or they might say, hey, I don't see any reason to believe in any gods at all. How you interpret things in your head, that doesn't mean that's how it actually is in reality. And that's what a lot of people theists and atheists alike tend to forget. You are not the inerrant arbiter of what the real world is actually like. And that's why we have to ask these questions about how we come to actual conclusions. Not what makes you happy, but how do we determine what is actually going on? Leave your faith at the door. It doesn't mean anything. We need to look at the evidence. And the religious, they often don't want to talk about that, but you have to be willing to do so. If you don't care about what is actually true, as I think most of us know, and the religious really don't, then you're just wasting everyone's time on an emotional fantasy in your head. Sadly, that's what's really going on most of the time in religion. It's why you don't get anywhere useful when you just believe. It's why these people look so dumb. Don't be these people. Be better.
So that's strange, but it does happen in some cases. I don't think it's the majority. I don't think it's common. Think of it like a medication someone takes, and they go, in rare cases, there's this side effect. I think that in rare cases, there's the side effect of people abandoning their faith, at least appearance-wise, saying, I don't know about this whole God thing.
Well, you probably ought to be more concerned given how poorly religion, particularly Christianity in the Western world, is faring right now. Now, Mike Winger is part of the whole Calvary Chapel thing, which is kind of a middle ground charismatic denomination. He's pro-inerrancy and anti-Calvinism, that kind of thing. However, you can just look at the church and see it's hemorrhaging members just as fast as everyone else. His church isn't faring any better than any other. The church has been plagued not only by just a basic loss of members, they're just splitting all over the damn place because nobody actually likes anybody else. There's a bunch of different Calvary denominations now, and it looks to be just be getting worse as time goes on. So I'd say Mike ought to be concerned about the future of his own church because it is not doing well. It won't be long until he's up there just talking to himself. There won't be anyone else to con. And that's not a bad thing from our perspective, but from his, yeah, probably it's pretty bad.
That's a concern, okay? Even a rare side effect is still a side effect, okay? So that is a concern, but I would not want to project that onto everybody. I think most people who believe in Santa as a kid, it has no impact on their beliefs about God and religion, and it shouldn't.
Unless it gets them thinking, because most people treat God and Santa pretty much the same way. The only real difference is that most parents don't really believe this stuff about Santa, but when it comes to God, they actually buy into it. They have a vested interest in their kids continuing to believe this crap forever, because if they don't, it just makes them feel really bad that their kids have left the flock. Now, we can look at this from a couple of different perspectives. What if, in the future, people start to think Santa is real over the long term? Would Santaism become a new religion or religion analog? That's kind of an interesting question, I think, don't you? Or what if Christianity adopted the Santa model, where you eventually grew out of it, but it was still something that was fun for the kids to do, and it comforted them, and they thought that they were going to go to heaven or whatever the hell, so people kept pretending that it was real. Because that's really the only difference between the two, isn't it? One you grew out of, and the other, sadly, you don't. I mean, you should grow out of both of them because it's not hard to imagine Santa Clausism becoming dangerous if it was allowed to fester into adulthood. Politicians arguing who's in the nice book and who's in the naughty book. People getting into fights over who has the right interpretation of Santa. Santa cults everywhere. I mean, I think you get the picture. It would look just like it does now with religion. 45,000 distinct sects of Santa Clausism. Tell me where the difference is, because honestly, I'm not seeing it.
It shouldn't. Plenty of us had believed things that were not true that our parents told us, maybe because they thought it was true.
And you've just described religion. So close. So close. Of course, he'll never see it that way because he has a vested interest in not doing so. He's got parishioners to fleece. If Santa ran a worldwide gift-giving conglomerate, he'd have a really good reason to keep the scam going, wouldn't he? These things are so incredibly similar, except to people like Mike who don't want to see it that way, that it can be a useful parallel to get kids to see just how empty religion actually is. Santa isn't real, no matter how good it once felt to think that he was, so what does that say about God? I don't know, but Mike seems like he's trying to skirt around it because he can't see, or doesn't want to see, the incredible similarities.
Why would this affect my belief in God? It shouldn't, but in some cases it does. Okay, the second issue is that of it's just a deception. Telling your kids, we're going to pretend there's a Santa Claus, that would be one thing, but deceiving them, I know it's common.
He's really not helping his case, is he? Well, we're going to pretend there's a God. I know he'll never see it that way, but he should. But here's the reality, and I'm sure he'll get more into this in a second, but we tell our kids things that we know aren't true all the time. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to you. Well, that's not true. That is a complete lie. Bad things happen to everyone, some worse than others. We don't tell kids that because we don't want to scare them unnecessarily, especially since at that age, there's really nothing they can do about it. Your bus driver might have a mental breakdown and drive the school bus into a gorge and kill everybody on board. What are you going to do to stop that? Now, for most people, that doesn't happen. Most people get through childhood with a couple of scratches and nothing really horrible happening to them. I mean, unless you're a Catholic or a Baptist or, well, unless you're religious, then you're just as apt to get molested by a priest or a pastor or whatever, or sold by your parents to some old guy who's willing to give them money so you can get raped for the rest of your life and abused and maybe killed because your religion gives your husband the right to do that. If you don't please him, then you're toast. I mean, there is that, but we still don't tell our kids what's coming, do we? Or do they? I don't know. I don't know how it works for Muslims. Somebody tell me down in the comments if you know. Do they raise their daughters with the knowledge of what's on their way? Because I'm sure the Catholics don't tell their kids, don't let the priest try to get in your pants when they drop them off for Sunday school. Yes, I know I'm getting off topic, but it's still an interesting question, isn't it?
Okay, and every argument against the deception thing, well, let me put it this way. A lot of the arguments against me here, like I said, it's volatile, would be, that's not a problem. And you're really thinking it's not a problem because we always do that. And we've always done that. And for generations we've done that. So how could it be a problem?
Now he's just rambling, so I'm just going to jump in here where I can. You notice that he's just describing religion here, right? Well, we've always done that. But that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it true. We've always done it. That doesn't mean anything. You can do that with anything. Well, we've always just driven drunk. Okay, but times change, and now, if you do that, you go to jail. You lose your license, and everybody thinks you're just an asshole. Just because your parents or your grandparents got away with it, that doesn't mean that you should. And again, I never directly lied to my kids. I didn't introduce the idea of Santa any more than I introduced the idea of God. Oh, Santa, huh? And presents with Santa's name just showed up under the tree. And when they figured that out, it was just fun. It was like getting the things that they would have gotten all along, but now we just put our names on them and they still keep getting presents. It was a game. They're still getting presents to this day. We're just shipping them across the country now, and none of them have Santa on it.
You're basically insulting my grandma by saying this, Mike. And I'll be like, well, your grandma's not as perfect as you think anyways, but more to the point, we have always done this is not an argument against it being deceptive, and deceptive in a significant way.
Which is why the way that we did it worked. Because these ideas are out there in society, whether you like it or not. I never had to lie to my kids and say, well, there's this guy who lives at the North Pole called Santa Claus, and he flies around in a sleigh with a bunch of reindeer, and he brings presents to all the good boys and girls. But if you're bad, you get coal in your stocking. At which point, it becomes very self-serving to try to scare your kids into behaving because otherwise they're going to get a sock full of black hydrogen-deficient hydrocarbons. Yeah, we didn't do that. Using Santa as a threat is evil, but using God as a threat is evil too. Well, you're going to go to hell if you don't do what I say. I have heard Christian parents say that in public. The two are really not that different. And a lot of the Santa myths come from religion, which maybe we'll get into next time, I don't know. Anyhow, I think this is where we're going to leave it off for the week, because this is going to get pretty long otherwise. Will Mike be able to come up with a reason why your kid's believing in Santa is bad that doesn't also apply to his own imaginary friend? I kind of doubt it, but he's looking mighty uncomfortable, and I think that somewhere deep inside, he realizes just how similar the two ideas are, but he can't dare say so because the people who believe in one and not in the other, at least one would hope, won't give him money if he does. So we'll come back to watching Mike stumble around some more next week. What do you think so far? Let me know down in the comments. If you have kids, did you tell them about Santa? Why or why not? What was your reasoning? Because I think that's an interesting conversation to have, and I've had it plenty of times over the years, both with Christians and atheists alike. I don't know if I've ever had it with a Muslim. I mean, if you have, let me know that too, because that's another interesting question. Anyhow, until next week, look forward to watching Mike Winger squirm. You know he's not going to be honest about anything, but he can't hide it if you know what to look for. Because Mike is just a con man, and he's not fooling anyone, except for the religiously gullible. Because those people just aren't that bright.